here we go. Alan, we welcome you again today. And today we're going to continue to look at our emotional sobriety growth and learning and the 12 steps. Today you're going to give us an in-depth take on step 3, principles and emotional sobriety core value. Really glad to see you, Alan, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. Well, first off, 2024, here we come, right? This is going to be quite a year. As I look to the future and what we have in store for us this year, and with Patrick and this Berlin group and the big meeting we're going to have in May in London, I am so excited, Patrick. What an event that's going to be, and for us to be able to meet face to face, for those of you that are in Europe and not here in the States, I look forward to it very much so. I think that probably you're going to be getting more and more information about it, but it's really great. Herb and I are going to be doing a workshop for 3 of the mornings. And then on the last day, we're going to be joined in a panel discussion, as I understand it, right, Patrick, with the other presenters. So it's going to be I think, quite an engaging and hopefully transformative experience for all of you. Susie, I so much appreciate what you said about what I was sharing on, because the topic was our way of life, and I talked about how first it was my way of life before it became our way of life, right? And that's where we all start, right? Is we all have to start with our own way of life and what that means for us and what that looks like for us. And sometimes I step back and I look at some of the messages in the program, and I find them to be sometimes shaming and so in one way such a negative way to look at who we are. Like one of the messages I heard so many times is our best thinking got us here, which meant that our thinking was screwed up, right? Is that, my God, we had things backwards and we didn't know how to live life. And all of that's true. I'm not in any way denying that we have to look at ourselves and some of what we now call, those of us that are in recovery, our old ideas and how those served us. And they did in one capacity, but how they failed to serve us in another capacity. And that's all very important. But it's also true that our best thinking got us here and is keeping us here. You see, we were all seeking in one way or another, even if what we did was project our motivation to get help on others. Let me say something about that, because I think it's a concept that we don't talk about too often. You see, if everybody in your life is sending you the message that you need to change, they're doing that because you are not taking the responsibility to accept that you need to change. So other people around us pressure us to change because we're not pressuring ourselves to change. I describe that in the following way, that we are projecting our motivation onto other people and mobilizing our environment to do for us what we are unable to do for ourselves. So in one way, that part of us that's projecting that responsibility onto our environment is the part of us that wants to get well. We're just so distant from it. We're so alienated from that side of us, we're not even in touch with it. Now, you've heard me describe many, many times in the times that we've spent together, because we've spent some time together, Patrick, haven't we? We've really gotten so you guys gotten a good sense of who I am and how I think about these things. And, you get a sense that, in the time we've spent together, that I believe it's what's right about us that we ignore that causes us the most pain and difficulty in our life. And you've also heard me say that recovery is about recovering the parts of ourselves that we've alienated and disowned. It is truly a salvage operation, if you will. The parts of us that we've thrown away, that we haven't made friends with, that we don't know how to integrate into who we are for a lot of different reasons. And we've been exploring those, and we will continue to explore those. But those parts of us that are alienated are very important. You see, one way of thinking about our recovery is that we are trying to take all of these parts that are disharmonious, that we think are incongruent with who we need to be, and we're trying to bring them into harmony so that they can be so that they can make a joint contribution to who we are. Well, that's a mouthful. Let me say it again so you've got a chance to digest that, right? So our job in recovery is to take all of these parts of ourselves that are in conflict, that are in disharmony, that are creating the civil war, the what William James called the feeling of being torn to pieces, to taking all of those different parts and finding a way to bring them into harmony. The only way that's possible is through experience. And recovery is an experiential therapeutic activity. There is no question about it. It cannot be an intellectual pursuit. If you just get it up here, you're not going to get it. Let me just put it that way. If you get it up here, you're not going to get it. It's got to be here and here. And in your feet, it's got to be integrated in your behavior. You can tell someone who's done the work in the recovery is they are congruent. What they say is who they are and what they do. They walk like they talk. Their life is seamless. They have practiced these principles in all of their affairs. You've met people that have done that. They're very special people. They almost emit an energy, don't they? It's like that there's this aura around them, this vibe around them. And you say, my God, there's something very special about that person, about who they are and about how they're living their life. That's what I saw when I met my sponsor, Tom, over 52 years ago. He had that kind of energy. I wanted what he had, and I didn't even understand what he had, but I knew I wanted it. I had no idea of what it was, but it was something that I knew would be of value to my life. And that if I could find that way of life, that I wouldn't have to drink and use again. I could somehow make this crazy existence make some sense. And that doesn't mean being happy all the time. Not at all. That's not what the goal here is, to be happy. The goal is to be alive, to be fully alive, to be able to fully embrace our human experience, or what my mentor, Dr. Kempler, said. We are humans, and he likes to put a comma there, being. We are a human being. That's what we are, a human, comma, being. And that's the journey that each and every one of us are on. And I'm excited about where this journey might lead us in 2024, Patrick, right? We're going to get together. I'm going to actually be able to pinch those Irish cheeks of yours and give you a kiss, Patrick. One of those big old Irish hugs and kisses. Can't wait to do that. And with you too, Susie, you're going, right? You're going to be in London. You wouldn't miss it, would you? And I hope many of you join us. I've got a bunch of other workshops coming up this year that we're going to be doing as well. And I've got another trauma workshop coming up in April that those of you that want to come and have an incredible experience, 8 people are going to join me again here at my home in Doylestown. So there's a lot of exciting things happening this year. So I hope you'll join us on this incredible journey we've been taking. So let's dig into now the task at hand. Happy New Year, everyone. We're talking about step 3. And I always like to put the steps in the context, because there's a certain energy, there's a certain force that is surfacing, that is emerging in our life, that is moving us towards what we can be. In one way, and I don't think I've ever said it like this before, but it struck me this morning as I was thinking about this presentation with you, is one of the things that the steps are restoring and recovering in our life is what I call the biological and psychological imperative. Now, what the heck does Dr. Berger mean by that? Well, that's a good question. I knew you were thinking that, Susie. I could see that. What the heck does he mean? Well, it's how you and I are made, how we're constructed. You see, we're always moving towards what is possible. We're always moving towards wholeness and completion. In religious circles, we call it holiness. In psychological realms, we would call it self-actualization, self-realization, becoming who we can be. That force, we can also call that a force of differentiation, is hardwired into you when you're born, whether you're neurologically normal or neurologically atypical. You are always moving towards being able to actualize what is possible for you at any given moment in your life. The problem is the things that were available to us early on in life resulted in us having to compromise much of who we are. And that's where the problem came in. In order to be okay, I had to be somebody other than I am. And that's never going to work. A life built on that kind of a consciousness It's like building your home on somebody else's property and trying to claim that it's yours when they own the property. Doesn't work. Doesn't work at all in our life. And we all suffer that. That's the second half of the first step, right? We were powerless over fill in the blank, our addiction, food, our alcoholism, our alcohol, whatever it is, our sex addiction. And then the second part of that, and that our lives have become unmanageable. And you see that unmanageability is so much more than the unmanageability that always follows being addicted. Yes, that creates a heck of a storm in our lives and a lot of unmanageability. But the truth is, we were unmanageable well before we picked up that first drink or we started to go down that path of our addiction. Part of picking up that drink for me was a part of the problem I was having. It was part of me being self-reliant, but I'll talk about that at another day and time. But it was definitely, I turned to that because I couldn't turn to people. There was no one to turn to that could meet my needs. So that's what these steps are doing. They are restoring that psychological imperative. You can think about it this way. If I go 1, 2, 3, what are you thinking about immediately? The number 4. Da, da, da. What do? You complete the sequence. We are wired to complete things. We are wired to move towards wholeness. We are wired to finish unfinished business. We are wired to move developmentally towards what we can be. That's why you don't have to tell a child that, hey, Susie, you've been crawling around this house for a year. It's time to get up now and pull yourself up on that coffee table and learn to walk. Nobody had to do that to Susie. Nobody did that to me. Hopefully nobody did that to you because that would probably mess up our walking terribly, right? Somebody else's expectations. What did we have to do? We had to follow our developmental path. And I was going to walk when I was ready to walk, not when my mom or dad wanted me to walk, but when I was ready. Neurologically, I had matured enough and I had coordinated all of the different things that have to be coordinated in my central nervous system to be able to pull off that amazing feat called being bipedal on walking, letting go of that coffee table and balancing. And then after you figure that balance out is to take your first step. And what do you do after your first step? You fall. You make a mistake. And how many times do you fall? I didn't count how many times I called, thank God, because if I had the consciousness I had today, I'd say, oh shit, it's been 50 times. I must be a loser. I'd stop walking. I'd give up. So would you. But we didn't have that consciousness. Thank goodness. We walked and we fell and we picked ourselves up. Maybe we cried and then we looked over to mom or dad to see if we were okay. And if they had that warm affection on their face, you're fine. We picked ourselves up, scraped ourselves off, and did it again, and did it again, and did it again, and again, and again, and again. Until what? Until you integrated all of those mistakes in becoming successful at walking. We get to success through making mistakes and learning from it. You cannot bypass that formula. And yet, as adults, because of what goes on up here, we think, well, I should somehow know how to do that. I don't know where that wishful thinking comes from. I have some ideas, of course, as a psychologist. I have a lot of ideas about a lot of things, but we do that number on ourselves. We shit on ourselves. We put these expectations on ourselves. So when I say that the goal of these steps is to restore the psychological and biological imperative that we've interrupted, it becomes very true because that restoration also helps us to self-regulate. Emotional sobriety is about self-regulation. It's about not being reactive to what's happening in our life, but being response-able, to being able to respond and to be thoughtful about our response and bring the best of us as best we can to any situation that we're dealing with, especially when there's trouble or when we're upset and there's tension. That's what emotional sobriety is about. How to have the best of you show up when the worst of you wants to scream and shout and object and blame. It's your fault that I'm like this. If you would only do that, I wouldn't behave this way. Yeah, well, good luck with that working to grow you up. And then the whole world has to change for you to be okay. It's not going to happen. Trust me, I've tried it. I think Susie tried it. Patrick has tried it. We've all tried it in this room. We all know what that means. So the restoration of the psychological imperative to move us towards what we can be. As Bill said in the step 12, when he was in the 12 and 12 talking about this, he says that if we practice these principles of the 12 steps in our daily lives, that we and those about us begin to find emotional sobriety. And that's what he's talking about. So now we're back to step one. What happens in step one? What's the energy? What's the charge that's created that begins to restore this psychological imperative? Well, what happens in step one is we finally start to face our limitations. Probably for the first time in our life, we're honest with ourselves. And we're able to see the truth that I have limitations. I can no longer claim special status, and that I'm able to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it. So when I admit I'm powerless, it's the beginning of breaking this false self, shattering this false self that says I have to be something other than myself to be okay. You see, the first step is a deconstructing step. It's deconstructing who we think we are and who we think we need to be so that we can become what we are, what is possible. But there's no way of doing that until we go through a period of deconstruction. And so the first part of that deconstruction is the admission of powerlessness over alcohol or whatever, you fill in the blank. In NA, they say our addiction. I like that because it's all encompassing. But if there's a value to specifically for somebody that's an alcoholic to talk about being powerless over alcohol because of the experience you have when you drink, that you lose control eventually, no matter how many times you try to control it. So we come to grips, and it's difficult. This first step is the most challenging step because of all the forces that are acting on us that are resisting facing that limitation, because it means that I'm not going to be what I think I need to be okay. So what am I going to be? How am I going to get to okay if I got to give that up? It creates a certain kind of a panic and desperation. At the same time, it's leading us towards liberty. We don't feel that yet. We have no idea how it's going to lead there. And then not only are we hit with the left hand or the left hook, now the right hand comes back and says, guess what? Not only are you powerless, but you pretty much screwed up your whole life in the way you've been living. Oh my God. How do I accept that without being crushed, without falling into a state of hopelessness and despair? Well, the answer is you don't. The goal of that first step is for you to experience the complete, utter hopelessness that your condition has created in your life. It's not about hope. It's about feeling hopeless. It's about embracing your hopelessness. Bill said recovery is based upon a pedestal of hopelessness. Recovery is based upon a pedestal of hopelessness. The first step is that pedestal. What I am doing, how I am living, how I am trying to be in this world is an impossible way of life. If I continue to go down this path, things are not going to change. My life is not going to change. This is hopeless. I have a hopeless condition that if anything, if I don't wake up to this wake-up call, it's just going to get worse. And where does it end? We know. Death, institution, jail, homelessness, and even worse, just being completely alone in your life and having nobody around. That's where this takes us. Complete isolation. So there's a charge that's building up. I describe first step as creating an existential crisis. And that existential crisis is creating a lot of power because it doesn't feel good to feel hopeless. It feels desperate. So either there's got to be some possibility or I might as well kill myself. That's what we come to, is that moment, that existential crisis. I can't keep doing what I'm doing, but I have no idea how to do things differently. No concept that there's another possibility. I feel utterly hopeless. That's the existential crisis. And that creates a big charge. Remember, I say, the psychological imperative moves us from an unresolved situation to resolution, right? To homeostasis. I'm dysregulated. I'm knocked off balance. I no longer can find the balance that I've been finding because that balance doesn't work. But I don't know what a new balance looks like. So I'm charged. There's an energy here. And this first step builds a big charge if you let it. But allowing yourself to feel hopeless is not an easy thing to do. Bill talks about it. Every instinct cries out against that. I don't want to feel that way. I want to feel like I can control my life. I want to feel like I can be in control, because the anxiety it releases is tremendous. There's an existential anxiety that goes with that existential crisis. So at the same time, we're feeling hopeless. We're feeling a tremendous resistance to feel that hopelessness. And this is important. And I want you to hear this. Every step in our recovery involves understanding and dealing with the resistance you have to taking that step. You cannot work the steps fully unless you also deal with how you're resisting the step. You cannot bypass this work. And resistance doesn't mean you don't want to get well. It just means that it's your stuck point. And I object, and I feel abject even at times when I see people that are stuck in their resistance being told you don't want to get well. It's bullshit. They want to get well. They don't know how to get past the resistance. It's not that they don't want to. Please don't ever say that to someone. You don't want to get well. They do want to get well. It's just they're stuck. They're at what we call a sick point. It's the point where they don't know how to move forward. Telling them that they don't want to get well doesn't help them, just makes them feel worse about themselves. The real message needs to be, I know you want to get well. I'm not so sure how to help you right now. Let's see if we can get some other people in to help figure out what to do to help you get unstuck. But don't diagnose someone and give them a prognosis because you can't help them. Please, please, I beg of you. That's my 2024 wish. Okay, so you feel the charge? You feel the charge to step one? It's powerful, isn't it? Right? This energy, it's building, it's shaking the foundation, the very foundation of our life. And as I said, the psychological imperative, we move towards regulation, towards resolving that. And that's what step two does, is it discharges or resolves what's unresolved from step one. How does it do that? Very simply. The message of step two is what? There is hope. There is hope. If you feel helpless and hopeless, and someone can reach you with that there is some hope to a better way of life, and you're able to hear that, even if only a small part of you hears it, it starts to mobilize something inside of you. As you heard me say before when I talked about step two, that there was a very interesting study that Jerome Frank did. He was a Harvard psychologist, and he looked at the shamans, he looked at Western medical doctors, and he looked at psychotherapists. And what he was looking at is what were the commonalities between the therapeutic forces that these different groups of healers were able to mobilize within a person. And the thing that he found that was true in what he called a general therapeutic effect of all of these different approaches, regardless of their differences, was the installation of hope. If Wendy came to me and was having these terrible dreams about her grandmother and what was going on, and I was a shaman, I would say, your grandmother is sending you a message, and we're going to go ahead and deal with what your grandma is saying, and we'll take her through a whole ritual to resolve it. I've just given Wendy a way of thinking about her problem and a solution to it. When we walk in this program, we're told we're not bad people. We're people afflicted with a disease. We're sick people needing to get well, not bad people needing to get better. We're sick people needing to get well. We have a soul sickness, and it's cured through a spiritual path. That's the message. Begins the installation of hope, that there is a way. I may not know much about it. If you guys have heard me share my story, back when I met Tom in 1971, I was just back from Vietnam. I was back for about probably less than a couple months. So I think still some of the Vietnam smell was still on my body when I met him. And when he shared that night, I had this unbelievable experience, and I couldn't have articulated it to anyone that way because I didn't have the words. But today I would say there was a part of me that knew that if I could experience what he was experiencing in his life and approach his life the way he was, I think this life could work. That was the moment that hope was instilled in me. And it resolved all of the hopelessness I felt from what I was realizing from step one. There is a solution. I couldn't see it. I could feel it. Listen to what I'm saying. I couldn't see it yet. I had no idea what it meant. None of us could. You have no idea what that solution is going to look like, but you can feel it that there's a possibility there. And that's what I felt. That's what I mean. Recovery is experiential. It's not something here. I can get the idea, oh, yeah, I see what people are doing. But if I don't feel it here, I'm not going to be mobilized. You see, when I felt that, at that moment, I was willing to go to any lengths to get well because I wanted what you had, because I wanted what I desired inside of me, which is wholeness and freedom. So step two, resolve the existential crisis I experienced in the deconstruction of my false self in step one. That's what happened. Now, if that was just where things ended, we'd only have two steps. But hope and the experience that there's a possibility doesn't mean anything until I start to pursue that in my life. So now the charge was, there is a solution. What is it and how do I do it? That's the new charge that develops in step two. What is this solution and how do I discover it for me? What is it going to mean for me? I see what it means for you. I see what it means for Joe. I see what it means for Sally. But what does it mean for Alan? That's the new charge that develops in step two. So while one situation is resolved, another energy, another charge is developing that's unresolved. What does this mean? How do I do it? Not why. I don't like why questions. They get you into your head. What and how get you into your function, into what you're doing? Please get rid of all your why questions. From now on, every time you say why, you have to pay Dr. Berger a nickel. And this is how I'm going to retire. You, each and every one of you, give me 5 cents. You're going to put a little jar next to your kitchen table. And after a year, you're going to send me all your nickels. And I imagine within about 2 years, I will have about $20 million. And I'll be able to retire. Just a nickel every time you say why from now on in the jar for Dr. Berger. It's retirement. You can put on there Dr. Berger's retirement fund, a nickel every time you say why. Oh, but let's even make it better. I can retire faster. The why and should jar. Every time you should yourself, you have to put, oh, let's make that a dime. A nickel for whys, 10 cents for shoulds. I'm going to be retired in 6 months. It's going to happen much faster. I'm done. So goodbye. Thanks, Patrick. Set up. I'll send you guys my address and you just send me the funds accordingly. And we're all finished. No whys, no shoulds. We're going to have a should and why free existence from this point forward. Okay. How is this going to be my reality? What do I have to do to make this happen? How do I create this experience in my life? What do I have to do? That's the new charge that's happened in step two. You see it? So step three comes along and here we are. Now we're in step three. How does it resolve this question? Not why. That's a nickel for Dr. Berger, but what and how? What do I have to do? How do I have to do it? Well, in order to start that journey, what do you have to do? We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Now, the way I translate that is someone who was not raised in religion, and I'm agnostic. I don't think I'm not an atheist. I believe in some force out here. If you want to call it God, that's fine with me. There's a lot of different ways I think about it, but I think what this step is asking me to do is making a commitment to discovering this new way of life. Give me 1 second. I want to find something to read to you. Okay. All right, here it is. This is a discussion of commitment by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And this is what Goethe says. Until one is committed, there is always hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. I'll say that again. Until one is committed, there is always hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth. The ignorance of this truth kills countless ideas and splendid plans. And here's the truth, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence, listen to the word, then providence moves too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising to one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no one could have dreamed would have come her way. Whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. The magic in the program is that Bill understood in his divine inspiration that to have hope, we have to make a commitment to pursuing a new way of life. We have to continue to deconstruct who we think we had to be in order to become what we can be. So this step Herb talks about is making a decision to turn towards. Yes, it's turning towards. To me, what it's doing is really allowing yourself to flow with what? The psychological imperative. You've got a charge. You are feeling hopeful. Now, what do you need to do to realize that hope in your life? Well, you need to make a commitment to figure out how to live a better life. It's that. That's the formula here. And we know that unless you make a commitment that is as 100% as strong as a commitment you made when you were out there drinking and using, it's not going to work. If you think you can go ahead and pursue recovery with less energy than you pursued your addiction, you are sadly mistaken. I don't know about you and what kind of an addict you were, but I'd go to any lengths to get high. I'd let nothing stand in my way. Will you let nothing stand in your way in your recovery? What lengths will you go to in your recovery? What rules do you have? Do you have an idea, something like this? Well, God, I've been doing this for 6 months. I should feel better. Is that willing to go in any lengths? That means you're just willing to go to certain lengths. If things go the way you want them to go, then you'll go ahead and keep going in recovery. Recovery is about staying the course when it would make more sense not to. Recovery is about learning how to live with these unresolved issues and move towards the resolution. Recovery is about taking responsibility for the existence you want to create in your life. Not the existence you've created, but what you want, what you truly, deeply want, what you can be. Now, how are we doing so far? You guys, is this making sense to you? Is it kind of laid out in a way it's a different kind of approach? I know it's not, you're getting someone who's in recovery and who's also wearing a lot of different hats, right? Psychotherapist, psychologist, person in recovery, someone who suffers and struggles with the pain of that suffering and all of that stuff. But now we come to what I said before. We have to understand what might be the resistance in us to making this commitment. So this is where this Monday is actually a bit of a workshop. So get a piece of paper and pen out, or pencil, whatever you choose. I'll give you a minute to do that. I'm going to give you some incomplete sentences that I want you to write at least 6 endings to. Between 6 and 10 is ideal. No more, but no less. Okay? So the way this works is I will give you a stem of a sentence. Like one of the things that I enjoy most about my life is, and then you'll fill in the blank, whatever the first thing is that comes to your mind. Now, this is very important. Do not censor this. Do not try to write what you think would be the right answer, because that'll be the wrong answer. You got to write to whatever comes to your mind first. So the first one is, the fear I have that stops me from making a commitment is, the fear I have that stops me from making a commitment is. So write that sentence them down, take a couple minutes and come up with 6 to 10 answers, and I'm going to eat some of my vegetable casserole. So the second question, ready for number 2? Or second sentence stem, more accurately stated. What making a commitment means to me is, what making a commitment means to me is, ready for number 3? The disappointment I've felt when I've made a commitment before has been, the disappointment I've felt before when I've made a commitment has been, and the final, number 4. I like number 4. I like 4. 4 is my lucky number. So is 3. 3 and 4. Number 4 is the idea I'd have to give up about myself to make a full commitment to my recovery is, or the ideas I'd have to give up about myself to make a full commitment to my recovery are, the ideas I'd have to give up about myself to make a full commitment to my recovery are. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is I want you to just read over all 4 of the questions, and I want you to circle the response that is the most meaningful for you. So you're going to pick 1 out of 4 of each of the sentence stems, and then we're going to open up the room for you to share, and you're going to read, not interpret or comment. You're just going to read the sentence stem and then the answer that means the most to you. And you could say a few things about what makes it so meaningful for you, but that's it. Okay. So you're going to read the answer. You don't have to do all 4 if you don't want to, but you can do all 4, but just one response from each one that's the most meaningful for you. And I reserve the right to comment and say something to you about those things.